Who is the patch variant of Wolverine, and is it possible that he's actually the same version that we later see crucified in Deadpool and Wolverine, just at a different point in the timeline? The cameo fest at the beginning of Deadpool and Wolverine gave us a glimpse into some of Wolverine's most iconic stories, from his feud with the Incredible Hulk to his crucifixion at the hands of the Reavers, and of course, his time in Madripoor as Patch. Each of these variants has a rich history and a full world of context behind them, shaping their lives around them in a way that's so much more complex than what we got to see in just a few minutes of screen time. While each of these variants was incredibly exciting to see, it's important to remember that within the context of the adventures, they are much more than just cameos. So today, let's talk about the patch variant of Wolverine, and explore the idea that he may overlap with the crucified version of Wolverine from the same montage. The patch variant comes from a time when the X-Men had been all but presumed dead, with only a few sparse members around the globe. It appeared as though they had perished when the X-Men came across a demonic opponent simply known as the Adversary. As far as the public knew, the X-Men had made a valiant final stand in order to save the planet from this demonic creature, and had given their lives in the process. But the remainder of the team had been relocated to the Australian outback for safekeeping. When the X-Men arrived in Australia, they set up shop in an old base of operations known as the Cooterman's Creek, a base that used to be operated by Donald Pierce and the Reavers. While here, Wolverine learned of an auction in Madripoor, one which specialized in selling superhero and mystical artifacts that could help the criminal underworld in their fight against various heroes. The X-Men continued to operate as heroes, being called into different conflicts all across the world as needed, and eventually, their survival was revealed to the public when some of them returned to New York in order to join forces with X-Factor. But more on that in just a minute. While the mainline X-Men remained in Australia though, Wolverine set out to Madripoor to investigate. And here, Wolverine enters the seedy underside of the Marvel Universe. In Madripoor, the only morality you get is what you can pay for, because Madripoor is the central hub for most of the criminal activity on all of Earth. Crime syndicates run the streets and quarrel with one another for territory. Madripoor has the single most extensive menu of illicit goods and black market merchandise that any criminal could dream of. It takes a special kind of hardened outlaw to live in Madripoor, and luckily for Logan, he was actually perfect for it. At the time, the reigning crime boss over the city was Roach, a ruthless enforcer who had turned Madripoor into his own unofficial empire. When Wolverine first entered Madripoor, he was beaten to a pulp by Razor Fist and the villain Sapphire Sticks, and was brought to Roach and his forces. On the brink of death, Logan was rescued by a woman by the name of Jason, and began to take on the identity of Patch in order to hide the fact that the X-Men were not truly dead and gone. He dressed more properly and wore an eye patch, which was actually the perfect disguise for someone like Logan. Wolverine is known for his incredible healing factor, so even if someone looked like Wolverine, the fact that he's wearing an eye patch would tip off that he doesn't have Logan's healing factor, and therefore he couldn't be the real Wolverine. This was of course all a ploy so that nobody found out about the X-Men, but Wolverine continued to work at dismantling Roach's operation and empire. Patch learned that Jason was actually the Tiger, and Logan agreed that she would be a much better ruler of Madripoor than the Roach was, so they got to work dethroning him. Together, the two managed to topple the regime, but Wolverine's very clear that he did not like the crime lords at all, so he issued a stern warning to the new leader in Jason, that if she were to ever become like Roach, he would be there for her, and that he would stop her because he was an X-Man. He was putting her in power because he had faith that she would be a more fair and a democratic leader than Roach was, but he also understood how thoroughly power could corrupt. For a while, he staved off several different attempts at dethroning Roach, and the two worked together for a long time, even coming across a former member of the New Mutants that was known as Karma. Karma had been running jobs in Madripoor for her uncle, who was one of the powers who had actively been trying to dismantle the Tiger's operation. Eventually, however, Karma had a change of heart and started to help Patch and Tiger with their operation. But here's where the theory takes a dark turn. Living with a secret is always bound to come crashing down, and on one fateful day, Patch learned the police chief Ty knew the real identity and the history of the X-Men. At this point in time, Logan was bouncing back and forth between Madripoor and Australia with the X-Men, who had continued conducting operations around the world, and slowly, news of the X-Men's survival had made its way to various criminal syndicates, including places of Madripoor. Exactly what the X-Men were up to at this point in time is covered extensively on our video about why Wolverine was crucified in the first place, but the fact remains that this is the same story. While Wolverine was in Madripoor, the X-Men had come under the siege by Donald Pierce and the Reavers, and they decided to step into the Siege Perilous in order to escape them. To recount though, the Siege Perilous was not just a teleporter, but what it actually did is moved individuals into completely new lives as completely new people, which meant that stepping into one was comparable to death and then rebirth. Wolverine, however, did not know this, so when he returned to Australia, he was ambushed by Donald Pierce and the Reavers. They beat him senseless and turned over a cross so that they could crucify him onto it. This is where we get not only the iconic panel of crucified Wolverine, but where we also get one of the darkest and most gruesome variants in Deadpool and Wolverine in the film. This leaves us to wonder though, is this actually the same story in the cinematic landscape as it is in the comics? And if this one particular version of Wolverine is just having a very bad week? If this is the case, then it means that Deadpool didn't actually travel into two different universes to encounter two different variants of Logan, but instead Wade traveled into two different days on the same timeline, which was only separated by a few weeks or months. This same version of Wolverine could have been visited by Deadpool in Madripoor, which is where we see him being dismembered for the first time. Whether or not he was just annoyed with Wade or was actively trying to protect his cover is unknown, but we do know that Wade was very vocal about searching for variants of Wolverine. If he was broadcasting that out so loudly in the middle of Patch working undercover, then it's no wonder why he stabbed him in the head. But given Wolverine's general demeanor around Wade, it's entirely possible that he just did this because he was annoyed. This variant would have then continued along his Madripoor storyline, working with Tiger to take down Roach and helping Karma in the process, weaving their way into reconstructing the very hierarchy of Madripoor. Once he is done, he may have finally returned to Australia, only to be ambushed by Pierce and the Reavers, where they would then beat and crucify him, which we see in Deadpool and Wolverine in the iconic comic. For this version of Wolverine, this has already been bad enough, but it would just be his luck that things would get even worse. He was battered on the X, starving, broken down to his very limits, and what should he find but the very same annoying red crayon that almost exposed him in Madripoor. In the middle of his worst day, Deadpool shows up again as if nothing ever happened. And he doesn't even have the decency to cut Logan down from the X. He just leaves Wolverine pinned until Jubilee arrives and eventually gets him down. Again, if the comics are anything to go by. For exactly what happened to this version of Wolverine after this, however, once again, please be sure to check out our video on that and why Logan was crucified. But the idea that this could actually be Patch is fascinating and does hold weight from the comics. If these scenes are perfectly faithful to the source material, then it's likely that this is the very same Logan, just being annoyed by Deadpool twice in two very inconvenient ways. But anyway, friends, what do you think of the Patch variant and the idea that this is the same Logan that got himself crucified at the hands of the Reavers? Do you think that a cinematic side, that these are the same versions of the character, or is the multiverse showing us two entirely different timelines where the events have led to the same conditions? And is this two different versions of Wolverine? As always, my friends, if you love Marvel and Marvel theories, subscribe down below, and I hope you have a phenomenal day.